Hello class, welcome to our next topic, which is operant behavior and operant conditioning. Operant behavior is all about the study of the effects or consequences of our behavior. Pavlovian conditioning that we just talked about and took an exam on is all about what we call stimulus-stimulus associations. So remember, it's about the association of a conditioned stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus. So you're presenting sort of in time or overlapping one stimulus with another, like a bell and food. Operant conditioning is all about how the individual animal's behavior has consequences, and that there are consequences for those behaviors that then increase or decrease the probability of that future behavior. So today's take-home points, I want you to be able to use the word contingency and be able to appropriately leverage that and just use that terminology when discussing operant conditioning. Be able to distinguish and determine the difference between operant and Pavlovian conditioning, and then also to be able to successfully identify the different types of operant conditioning or operant behavior. So there are two types of behavior for the most part. We have respondent behavior, sorry, that should be a T, respondent behavior, or Pavlovian conditioned behavior. And that behavior is what we say is elicited, meaning that the stimulus comes to elicit that behavior because it's sort of a reflexive response. So in operant behavior, we use the terminology emitted to reflect that the individual or the organism emits behavior, but it's not necessarily sort of reflexively elicited by a stimulus. A stimulus may occasion or may make it more likely that a certain behavior occurs, but emitted sort of indicates that this behavior is more on a voluntary basis that's not elicited like a reflexive response is, but is occasioned by certain stimuli and becomes more probable or less probable based off of whether reinforcers or punishers are provided. So it's called operant behavior because the behavior operates on the environment, and then the environment essentially operates back to provide rewards or punishers. We typically call it voluntary behavior, meaning that it's emitted by the organisms. It's not sort of reflexive or forced by the environment. So it's more within the realm of what we call voluntary behavior. And it's concerned with contingencies. And a contingency is basically an if-then statement. So if you engage in some particular behavior, then consequence X will occur, or this particular consequence will occur. So contingencies occasion behavior, but the behavior sort of may or may not sort of have that particular response. So you can see a Coke machine, but you don't put any coins in it, you won't necessarily access a soda. It can be all right, sorry about that. So if occasion occurs, but the behavior doesn't, then there's no consequence. So you see a Coke machine, but you don't put any coins in it, you won't access a Coke. If the occasion does not occur, but strangely the behavior does, there is no consequence. But if the occasion and behavior both occur, the consequence may not always happen either, but this is the only situation in which it can happen. So basically the point of the contingency or sort of overall summary is that operant behavior is about if-then statements. If I do behavior X, or if I push on the door handle lever, it will open. It may not necessarily be always, but if I never push on the door handle, it will never open. But if I push down on the door handle there's a higher probability or a really high probability that it will open. So it's this if then. If I engage in this behavior, then there is a higher consequence or higher probability for this particular consequence occurring. And it's higher that that consequence will occur if I engage in the behavior than if I don't engage in the behavior. So examples of only if then relationships. So only if the lever is depressed or pushed, then food is presented. So this is a rodent in a typical operant chamber. You'll read about operant chambers in your reading. So only if this lever gets pushed down will the food be delivered. So we would say that lever pressing or food is contingent on lever pressing. So the contingency here is that to get the food, they need to press the lever. That's the if-then statement. Only if the key is turned, then the car will start. Or we would say that the car engine starting is contingent on turning the key. Only if the phone call is made, then a pizza is delivered. So getting pizza is contingent on calling and ordering for that pizza, or I guess probably more importantly, paying for that pizza. Only if you harass the dog, then it might bite. So operant behavior is essentially focused and surrounded by and dependent on contingencies. So whenever we're talking about operant behavior, we'll be talking about contingencies to some degree. So behavior that is modified by its consequences. Oops. Let me just make sure that that's. So behavior that is modified by its consequences is called operant behavior. The process by which behaviors change by its consequences is called operant conditioning. There's a variety of types of consequences out there, but critically we can categorize them into reinforcers and punishers. Reinforcers simply increase the future probability of behavior, and punishers decrease the probability of that behavior in the future. So in this case, the water can be a reinforcer. The process whereby the water strengthens the future probability of drinking is reinforcement. The hot stove here can be a punisher. The process through which the probability of touching hot stoves decreases in the future is punishment. So you can see the difference in terminology, whether it's a sure or mint ending. Punisher is the actual stimulus itself. Punishment is the process by which behavior decreases. There are two major types. There's positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment. So you have both the differentiation between reinforcement and punishment, as well as positive and negative. Importantly, and it's quite critical, that positive and negative do not necessarily mean good and bad. Instead, they indicate whether a stimulus is added, which is positive, or subtracted, which is negative. They do not necessarily relate whatsoever to whether you think something is good or nice or bad, which the positive is colloquially sort of bad naming because it makes you think that we mean something good, and negative meaning something bad, but in reality, it just means whether you add something or take it away. And this is forever confusing. So we can practice doing some of these things. When your dog sits, you give them a treat or praise. In the future, your dog sits more often. The first thing you want to do is identify whether the behavior goes up or down. In this case, the behavior goes up. And then the question is it because you added something or decreased something? And the answer is it goes up because you increase something, you provided food or praise. Another common way that people will teach sitting for dogs is you put pressure on your dog's rear and push down on their butt essentially until they sit. And when they sit down, you remove the pressure of your hand on them. In the future, your dog sits more often. So in this case, the process is actually negative reinforcement. It's reinforcement because the behavior is going up, right? Your dog is increasing the frequency of sitting. So we're in reinforcement land. And it's negative because what is the consequence that is increasing that behavior is the removal of a stimulus, the removal of the pressure that you're providing. So if you start providing pressure and then the dog engages in a behavior to remove that pressure, that is negative reinforcement. When a child screams, say the parent spanks the child. In the future, the child screams less frequently. This would be an example of positive punishment. The behavior is decreased, and it's because you added a particular stimulus. When a child screams, the parent takes away all the child's toys, or probably nowadays phone or iPad. In the future, the child screams less. This would be negative punishment. The rate decreases, so behavior is going down, which means it must be punishment. And the behavior is going down because you removed a stimulus from the environment, the toys. It's indicating that this is negative punishment. A timeout is a very common example of negative punishment. So when you're trying to determine what something is, you really have to answer two primary questions. It's what is the consequence of, how does the consequence affect the future probability of this response? Is it going up or is it going down, making it more likely or less likely? If it's more likely, then no matter what, you're working with reinforcement. If it's less likely, you're automatically working in punishment. Then you ask, was it because you added a stimulus or removed a stimulus? If it's because you added a stimulus, then you're in positive land. So if your answer to question 1 was reinforcement, then it's positive reinforcement. Answer to question 2 was punishment, then you have positive punishment. If it's because you removed a stimulus, then you're either in negative reinforcement or negative punishment. So let's think of a couple of questions. So a group of questions. So Janice has been petting her dog, and praising it every time the dog lies quietly beside the couch. She's been taking data on the dog's behavior, and it now lies by the couch more frequently than before she started petting and praising. Is the petting and praising positive, negative? Is it reinforcement, punishment, or not enough information? Every time a pigeon pecks a particular key, the experimenter gives access to the bird, or gives the bird access to the food. Every time Bobby acts out during class, the teacher makes him sit by himself in the corner, which means that Bobby doesn't have to do his work. Bobby starts acting out more and more frequently. Is making Bobby sit by himself? Is that positive, negative, reinforcement, or punishment, or not enough information? Okay, so let's jump to a couple of more scenarios. So question is positive or negative, or reinforcement or punishment. So let's look at this example in which we're trying to analyze Tommy's behavior. When Tommy screams at the checkout at a grocery store, his mom buys him a candy bar so that obviously he will stop screaming. As a result, he becomes more likely to scream at the checkout in the future. Is the mother reinforcing or punishing this? And is the mother adding or taking something away? Hopefully you see that she's adding something, so it's positive, and it's reinforcement because we're getting more screaming. On the contrast, what is happening with the mother's behavior? How is the mother's behavior changing? So Tommy screams at the checkout until the mother agrees to buy him a candy bar, at which point he stops screaming. As a result, his mother buys him candy bars more frequently during future trips to the supermarket because this gives the mother some peace and quiet. So what is happening? Is the mother's behavior going up or down? Hopefully you see that the mother's behavior is going up. Is it because Tommy is adding something or taking something away? And hopefully you can see that it's because Tommy is taking away his screaming. He's stopping the screaming. So the removal of screaming is negatively reinforcing the mother's behavior. So think about Sarah's behavior. Whenever Sarah talks to other children during quiet work time, she gets sent out of the classroom and no longer has to do classwork. As a result, Sarah talks to other children more frequently. So think first, is behavior going up or down? Which hopefully you can see that it's going up, so we're in reinforcement land. Is it because we're adding something or taking something away? And in this case, it's because we are taking something away. We are removing the classwork that Sarah has to do. So negative reinforcement. Now let's think about cat's behavior. Whenever Robbie's cat jumps up on his lap, he praises him loudly and cuddles his cat enthusiastically. As a result, the cat jumps on his lap less frequently. So is behavior going up or is it going down? Here, hopefully you can see it's going down. It's decreasing in frequency, so we're in punishment land. And is this positive or negative? Is he adding something or taking something away? And hopefully you can see that he is adding his affection, essentially causing positive punishment when his cat jumps up. So our operant behavior can also have a variety of links to behaviors that we might consider abnormal, things like compulsive hand washing. So compulsive hand washing can be in of itself sort of self-reinforcing or operantly reinforced because you have this initial fear of germs. Engaging in hand washing behavior removes that initial fear of germs, so your fear subsides. So in this case, hand washing increases, so it's reinforcement, but it's because you're removing a particular fear of contamination or germs. So essentially what's happening here is a negative reinforcement procedure. So the behavior is washing the hands and the consequences is the fear being removed. So here, hand washing gets negatively reinforced. We can also see a variety of different self-injurious behaviors, both within humans and animals. One of the more common ones would be head hitting in children with developmental disabilities and delays. And this typically occurs when they might be deprived of attention, not really like significantly deprived, but someone may not be necessarily attending to them right at that moment. So they might engage in some type of head hitting or head banging behavior, which is quite dramatic. So the person who wasn't paying attention to them immediately turns around and starts paying attention to them. So in this case, they are getting positive reinforcement, right? It's reinforcing and increasing the frequency of the behavior. And it's because you're providing something which is attention, not necessarily in a way that you mean to, but it necessarily can potentially be increasing its frequency. And there have been several studies to show that this is a common source of maintaining these types of behaviors. So reinforcers and punishers are defined by their effects on behavior. In other words, we define them functionally, not sort of a priori. And what I mean by that is that I can't say cheese is a reinforcer for this dog. I define cheese as a reinforcer only if it increases a specific behavior. Not that because it's cheese, it must be positive reinforcement. You can imagine that there might be situations where some people absolutely hate cheese or are lactose intolerant, where giving them cheese is actually a punisher rather than a reinforcer. So just about any stimulus can be a punisher or a reinforcer. We don't define it by whether it's good or pleasant or unpleasant, but rather how it influences behavior. If it increases behavior, it's a reinforcer. If it decreases behavior, it is a punisher, regardless of how we think about that behavior. And the same stimuli can change in function over time based off of the particular contingency. So let's dive off into a little example of how we can use things like positive reinforcement in a loose leash walking exercise.
Loose leash walking. Or in other words, no pulling on leash. Here you can see I am walking down the street with my two dogs and both of the leashes are slack. There is no tension in the leash and both dogs are calm and relaxed and doing what they like to do, look around and sniff. When you follow a dog on a tight leash, you are actually training the dog to pull. This is because they are getting a big reward for tugging you along behind. They get to move forwards. Not only is pulling uncomfortable for the owner, but is uncomfortable for the dog as well. A dog that pulls on leash is more likely to become over-aroused on walks because of the tension on their neck or chest, causing them to bark and lunge at other dogs and people. By walking on a loose leash, a dog learns to control their impulses and behave in a relaxed and calm manner. This is Max, a Chihuahua. He's giving a demo on what pulling on leash looks like. He's not looking back once and pulling ahead, getting to where he wants to go without a care in the world what I'm doing behind him. I mean nothing to him. Here's one game you can play. Drop a treat and walk ahead. As the dog catches up, click them before they get to you and reinforce them in the position you'd like them to be. So drop the treat at the back of your heel or feed them back behind your leg. What to do if the dog pulls. If the dog pulls ahead and the leash becomes tense, simply stop, encourage the dog back by patting your leg or making a kissy noise, take a couple steps back, and when they're on a nice loose leash, continue walking forwards. If the leash becomes tense again, just simply continue doing the backing up. Another technique is, as the leash becomes tense, you simply turn around and go the other way. Don't forget to click your dog when you see them walking perfectly. Also, practice stopping and clicking them for staying with you. If they rush ahead, no click. Here's a training tip. Practice indoors first, where there's no distraction. You want to build a strong foundation on the behavior of being next to you is the best place to be. If you do your homework and practice in your yard and in your house first before you hit the street, your dog will be more likely to be attentive to you. Another technique is don't go for the walk that you usually do, where your dog habitually pulls. Instead, practice walking back and forth in front of your house. Not only do you become very unpredictable in the direction that you're going, which can make your dog much more attentive, but your dog no longer knows which way is forwards. Therefore, they're less likely to want to pull ahead. The great thing about this technique is you're not forcing your dogs to stay with you. You're building being next to you as a wonderful place to be, so that even when you drop the leash, your dogs want to stay with you and in those positions that you've reinforced them for staying.
This is a bag of premium organic dog food.
All right. I remember a day of YouTube before all of these advertisements. So that will wrap up this introduction to operant conditioning, and I will see you soon.